German engineer in the early 1940s, crouched in a shallow trench while the devastating machinery of World War II thunders around him, realizing with a cold sweat that his greatest enemy isn't just the opposing army, but the rigid, straight line of his own rifle barrel. He watches as his comrades are forced to expose their heads and chests to a hail of gunfire just to get a clear shot around a stone wall or from the hatch of a stalled Panzer tank. And in that moment of lethal frustration, he asks a question that defied 5 centuries of ballistics. Why must a bullet travel in a straight line? This was the desperate spark of ingenuity that birthed the Krummlauf, a surreal and ambitious curved barrel attachment designed to allow soldiers to shoot around corners without ever showing their faces to the enemy. It wasn't just a gadget. It was a radical attempt to rewrite the physics of infantry combat, born from the brutal urban warfare of the Eastern Front, where every street corner was a death trap and every alleyway a potential ambush. The engineering behind this bizarre contraption was as fascinating as it was flawed, centering primarily on the legendary St. G44 assault rifle, the world's first true assault rifle. Designers like Hans Joachim Wiedemann labored to perfect various versions, most notably the I variant for infantry use and the P variant for tank crews. These attachments were bent at daring angles of 30, 45, and even 90 degrees, utilizing a specialized periscope sight that allowed a shooter to peer safely around an obstacle while the barrel itself pointed toward the target. To handle the immense physical strain of a bullet traveling through a curve, engineers had to drill tiny vent holes along the bend to bleed off high-pressure gases, a necessary evil to keep the barrel from exploding and to prevent the bullets from shattering under the sheer centrifugal force. It was a masterpiece of mad scientist engineering that looked like something pulled straight from a futuristic comic book rather than the grit of a 1944 battlefield. As the pressure of World War II intensified, the technical specifications of the Krummlauf grew increasingly complex to combat the inherent instability of a projectile forced into an arc. The Vorsatz J, the 30-degree model, was the only version to see significant production, but the dream of a 90-degree barrel haunted the testing grounds of the Rheinmetallborsig company. The sheer physics of a bullet hitting a 90-degree curve was almost impossible to manage. The lead projectiles would often liquefy or disintegrate against the inner wall of the barrel, turning the weapon into a glorified, one-way fragmentation grenade. To mitigate this, specialized ammunition was considered, but the logistical strain of the war made it impossible to distribute. Instead, engineers relied on the gasport system to reduce the muzzle velocity, which dropped significantly from the standard 685 meters per second to roughly 300 meters per second, drastically reducing the effective range, but allowing the weapon to function without immediate catastrophic failure. The periscopic sighting system, known as the Skispetcher, was perhaps the most delicate part of the entire assembly, consisting of a series of mirrors and lenses that had to be perfectly aligned with the bore. In the heat of World War II combat, these mirrors would frequently crack from the vibration of automatic fire or become obscured by the very gas being vented from the barrel's relief ports. Furthermore, the weight of the attachment severely altered the balance of the St. G44, making it incredibly front-heavy and difficult for a single soldier to maneuver in a fast-paced skirmish. The P variant,
The
designed for the
real
Tiger
power
and
of the
Panther
Bat
tanks,
bomb was not
intended
just
to
in the
solve the dead
explosives,
zone
it was in
problem,
the
where
psychology
enemy
behind
infantry
it.
could get too
Military
close for the main
planners
cannons to
believed
hit
that a
them.
weapon like this
By
could
mounting
create
a Krummlauf
thousands
through
of
a
separate
specialized
fires at
ball
once,
mount in the hull,
forcing emergency
tankers could
crews into
sweep the
chaos.
exterior of their
Instead
vehicle
of
with fire
responding
from
to
the
one
safety of their
impact
armor,
zone,
though the
defenders would have to
vibration
fight
within a
hundreds of
vibrating
ignition
tank
points
often
scattered
rendered the
across a
delicate
city.
mirrors
The
useless
goal was
within
to
minutes of
overwhelm
engagement.
infrastructure, delay
Despite the
response
brilliance of the
time,
concept,
and create
the Krummlauf was a
uncontrolled urban
mechanical
damage.
nightmare in practice,
Engineers
plagued
refined
by the
the
very
timing
laws of
mechanisms
physics it
so the
tried to
incendiary
circumvent.
devices would
The
activate
extreme friction
only
of the
after
bullet
the bats
scraping
had
against the
settled
curved
into dark,
interior
enclosed
meant that the
spaces.
life of a barrel
The
was
idea was
tragically
that the
short,
fires would
often
begin
wearing out or
inside
bursting
buildings,
after
not
only
in
a
open
few hundred
streets,
rounds.
making them harder to detect
Furthermore,
immediately.
the immense stress
During
frequently caused the
development,
standard
researchers studied bat
7.92x
behavior in
30
detail.
frame Kurz
They
bullets to
experimented with
fragment
different
into jagged
attachment
shards
methods,
before
ensuring
they
the
even
tiny
exited the
devices
muzzle,
would not hinder
effectively
flight.
turning a
The harness
precision
design
rifle
had
into
to
a
be
short-range
lightweight but
shotgun.
secure. Too
While
heavy
tank
and the
crews
bats
found
could
some
not
success
fly.
using the
Too
30-degree
loose and
version
the
to
devices
clear
would
enemy
fall off
sappers from the
prematurely.
blind spots.
Every adjustment
Surrounding their
required
vehicles,
careful
the
biological
infantry version
testing.
remained a clunky,
The refrigeration
front-heavy
system
curiosity
inside the
that was
bomb
difficult to
casing was
aim
another
and even
critical
harder to
innovation.
maintain in the
By
mud and
slowing the
blood of the
bat's
front lines.
metabolism,
It
scientists
remains one of
could
the most
delay their
iconic
awakening
wonder
until the
weapons of
container
World War
opened
II,
at the correct
a
altitude.
testament to how far
Precision
human
was
creativity will
everything.
bend
This
when
was
pushed
not
to the
just a
edge of
weapon,
survival.
but a coordinated
Beyond the
biological
technical
operation.
failure, the
But as
legacy of the
testing
Krummlauf
continued,
echoes into
questions
modern
grew
ballistics,
louder
as the
inside
dream of
military
shooting
leadership.
around corners
Some
never
officers
truly
worried about
died.
reliability.
After World
Weather
War
conditions
II,
could affect
Allied
bat behavior.
intelligence officers
Strong
captured
winds might
several
scatter
units
them
and took them
unpredictably.
back to the United
Others
States
questioned
and the
whether the
Soviet
fires would
Union for
concentrate in
exhaustive testing.
strategic targets or simply
American
spread
researchers at
randomly.
Aberdeen
By
Proving Ground were baffled by
1944,
the sheer
attention
audacity of
inside
the
the
design,
U.S. military
noting that,
shifted
while
toward
the
more
accuracy was
conventional
abysmal
strategic
beyond
bombing
100
campaigns,
meters,
and
the
eventually
psychological
toward a far
advantage it
more
provided was
powerful breakthrough
undeniable.
that was nearing
Decades
completion.
later,
Funding
this same
priorities
tactical
changed
obsession
quickly,
led to the
and
development of
experimental
modern
projects
systems
that
like
seemed
the
promising
Krummlauf,
suddenly
which
lost
uses
support.
high-resolution cameras
Despite never
and
being
hinged
deployed
frames,
in combat,
rather than
the
trying to
bat bomb
physically bend the
remains one of
steel
the
of a
most
barrel.
unusual
The
weapons ever
Krummlauf stands
seriously
as a
considered
haunting
in
relic of a
wartime
time
history.
when the
It
desperation of
represents a
total
moment
war
when
forced
innovation
engineers to
pushed
treat the
boundaries
laws
in
of physics as
unexpected
mere
directions,
suggestions.
when
Creating a
engineers,
weapon that looked
biologists,
like a
and
mistake,
military
but was
strategists
actually a
worked
glimpse into a
together to turn a
terrifyingly
natural
creative
creature
future.
into a delivery
The
system.
true scale of
It
the
also
Krummlauf
reflects
project
the
is
intensity
reflected
of
in the
global
production record
conflict during
that
World War
managed to
II,
survive the
when
final
nations
months of
explored
World War
every
II.
possible advantage,
Records
no matter
indicate that
how
approximately
unconventional.
10,000 to
Today, the
20,000
bat bomb
units
is
were
remembered
originally
less for
ordered
what
by
it
the
did
German High
and more
Command,
for what it could have
but the
done.
reality of a
It stands
collapsing
as a
industry
symbol of
meant that
experimental
only a
warfare,
fraction of that
an
number
idea
ever
born from
reached the hands of
desperation,
soldiers.
refined through science, and
Specifically,
ultimately
the
left
tank-mounted
unused.
Vorsatz P
Yet its
saw a
story
production run of
continues to
roughly
fascinate
500
historians
units,
and
while
military
about
enthusiasts
1,500
because it challenges
specialized
our
prismatic
assumptions
sights
about
were
what weapons
manufactured
can
by
be
Zeiss for
and
these
how
armored
far
vehicle
human
mounts.
creativity can
The
go during
infantry,
times of war.
Vorsatz J, was more
As the
numerous,
war moved
but it was
closer to
primarily
its
limited
final
to trial
phase, the
issues on
bat
the
bomb
Eastern
project
Front,
became a
where its
quiet
lifespan
footnote
proved to be its
inside
ultimate
larger
undoing.
strategic discussions.
With a barrel
Documents
life as
show
low
that
as
military
300 rounds
planners
for
were
the
still
30-degree
refining
model,
deployment
and a staggering
concepts in early
160 rounds for the
1945,
45-degree
considering
variant.
how many bombs
The
would be
Krummlauf
needed
was
per
often
aircraft
discarded as a
and how
piece
they
of
would
useless
coordinate
scrap
with
metal
existing
once
bombing
the
missions.
rifling had been
The
shredded by
vision
the
was
force
not
of
a
its
single
own
strike,
projectiles.
but a series of
In the
coordinated
1800s,
drops
the
designed to
concept of curved
saturate
fire
urban
was already
targets.
being toyed with
Each
through
aircraft
indirect
could
fire
theoretically
artillery,
carry
but the
thousands of
Krummlauf was the
bats,
first to attempt
meaning
to force
one
a
mission
physical
could
bend
release
upon the barrel
tens of
itself for
thousands
small
of
arms.
potential ignition
During the
points.
testing
The
phases of
scale
World
of
War
the
II,
idea was
some
staggering.
30-degree models
Yet the
surprisingly
complexity
achieved a
of handling
35x
living
35
cargo
cm
created
grouping
constant
at 100
challenges.
meters, a
Loading
feat that
procedures
defied the
required
expectations
extreme
of many
care to keep
critics
the
who
bats
assumed the
calm
shattered
and
bullets
properly
would make
stored.
aiming impossible.
Temperature control had to
However,
remain
the torque
consistent during
generated by the
transport.
rotating bullet
Ground
hitting the
crews
curve
needed
was so
specialized
violent
training,
that it
and
often
maintenance
ripped the
routines
attachment
were more
right off the
complicated
rifle's
than
muzzle
those for
if the
conventional
mounting
munitions.
brackets weren't perfectly
Every
secure.
additional step
This
increased the
sideways
chance of
recoil made
error.
automatic fire
Military
nearly
logistics
impossible
experts
to control,
began to
as
question
the
whether
weapon
the
would
system
walk
could be
in the
reliably
opposite direction of the
executed
curve
in the
with every
fast-paced
shot.
environment of
By
wartime operations.
1945, the
At the
project
same
was largely
time, the
viewed as a
strategic
waste of
landscape
precious
was
resources,
changing rapidly.
yet it
By
remains one of the most studied
1944, Allied
curiosities
forces
of
were
World War
gaining
II arms
momentum in
development,
multiple theaters.
illustrating a
Air
moment where
superiority
military
was
necessity
improving, and
forced science
conventional
to
bombing
confront its own
campaigns were
limits.
expanding. Decision-makers increasingly favored weapons that could be mass-produced and deployed with predictable results. Experimental projects, even those with promising test data, faced scrutiny. Resources were limited, and priorities shifted toward technologies that could deliver immediate impact. Public awareness of the bat bomb was virtually non-existent during the war. The project remained highly classified. Only small circles within military research units knew the full details. When reports later surfaced after the war ended, many people were stunned to learn that such a weapon had progressed so far in development. It challenged the common image of World War II technology, revealing how far innovation had stretched in search of advantage. Historians still debate how effective the bat bomb might have been if it had been deployed. Some argue that its unpredictability would have limited its military value. Others suggest that in the right conditions, especially in densely built wooden cities, it could have produced widespread structural fires. What is certain is that the weapon was engineered with serious intent, tested under controlled conditions, and funded at a level that shows it was more than a passing idea. The bat bomb now serves as a reminder of the experimental edge of wartime science. It demonstrates how conflict can accelerate creativity, pushing researchers to combine biology and engineering in unconventional ways. It also highlights how quickly priorities can change when new technologies emerge. In the end, the project was archived, its blueprints stored, its prototypes dismantled, and its story slowly uncovered years later by historians studying declassified records. Even today, the concept continues to spark curiosity because it blurs the line between nature and machinery, between strategy and imagination. It remains one of the most unusual chapters in military development during the Second World War, illustrating just how far planners were willing to go in their search for an unexpected advantage. As research continued behind closed doors, engineers also explored how the system would integrate with existing aircraft operations. The bomb casing was designed to fit within standard payload configurations, meaning it could, in theory, be deployed without requiring entirely new aircraft models. That compatibility was important because wartime production focused heavily on efficiency. Any weapon that demanded a redesign of bombers would have slowed deployment. The bat bomb's designers understood this limitation and worked to keep the structure as adaptable as possible. Meanwhile, animal behavior specialists studied how to minimize stress during transport. They tested different handling methods, experimented with lighting conditions, and refined the cooling system to ensure the bats remained in a controlled state until release. Every detail mattered because the effectiveness of the weapon depended entirely on timing and natural instinct. Once released, the bats would need to awaken, orient themselves, and seek shelter quickly. The success of the concept relied on predictable biological patterns, something that added both innovation and uncertainty to the design. As 1945 approached, strategic priorities shifted once again. Military leadership increasingly focused on weapons that could produce immediate and decisive results. Large-scale bombing campaigns were already reshaping urban landscapes across multiple regions. In that environment, experimental projects faced intense evaluation. Decision-makers had to weigh cost, time, reliability, and overall strategic impact. Even promising prototypes could be sidelined if they did not align with evolving objectives. After the war ended, documentation revealed the full scope of the project to the public. What once had been a highly secret initiative became a subject of historical analysis and debate. Researchers examined test reports, budget allocations, and technical drawings to understand how close the weapon had come to deployment. Some historians view it as a bold example of unconventional thinking under pressure. Others see it as proof of how experimental ideas can emerge during extreme global conflict.
The
The
fragmentation
bat
of
bomb
bullets could
remains a
actually
striking
increase
example of
lethality at
wartime
short
innovation
range.
at its most
The weapon's
unusual.
tendency to
It
behave
combined
like a short-range
biology,
scatter
engineering, and
device
military
made it
strategy in a way
unpredictable.
few other
But
projects ever
unpredictability in
attempted.
confined
While it
spaces
never entered
sometimes
combat,
favored the
its
attacker.
development demonstrates the
That
lengths
said,
to
the
which nations
cost-benefit
will go when
equation never
seeking an
justified
advantage.
mass
It
deployment,
also highlights the
especially when
experimental
Germany faced
atmosphere of the
severe
era,
shortages
when
of
rapid
ammunition,
technological
fuel, and
advancement
trained
blurred the
manpower.
boundaries between science
By
and
the time
warfare.
Soviet troops stormed
Even
Berlin,
decades
the
later, the
Krummlauf had
story
effectively
continues to
vanished from
capture attention
operational
because it
reports.
challenges
It was neither
expectations about what
decisive nor
weapons can
reliable
be.
enough to
It
influence the
represents a
outcome
moment
of the
in
war's
history
final
when
battles.
imagination and
Instead,
necessity
it slipped
intersected,
quietly into the
producing one of the
archives
most
of experimental
unconventional
weaponry,
projects
a
ever
footnote
seriously
overshadowed by
pursued during
larger
World War II.
technological milestones. Yet in museums and private collections today, surviving examples draw immediate attention. The curved silhouette looks almost absurd at first glance, like a prop from speculative fiction. But once its purpose is understood, the absurdity transforms into something else, a stark reminder of the pressures of total war. Engineers were not playing at fantasy. They were responding to very real tactical dilemmas with the tools and knowledge available to them. In many ways, the Krummlauf represents the outer boundary of classical firearms design. Traditional small arms depend on predictable internal ballistics, straight rifled barrels, stable projectiles, consistent gas pressures. The moment those principles are violated, performance collapses. The curved barrel forced engineers to confront how unforgiving physics can be. The centrifugal forces inside the bend were not suggestions, they were absolute. Still, the dream persisted because the battlefield demanded it.